So from the readings in digital ecclesiology, I read and loved chapter 7. And chapter 7 is written by Charles Melvin S. And it is called Beyond the Binary, How Digital is the Digital Church in the Corona Age. And it's an analytical, theological, and philosophical consideration of the church in the digital world. So one of the questions that's raised in chapter 7 is the efficacious nature of things that we find sacred in the religious world. So, for example, he raises this idea of Puja that is celebrated in Hindu faith practice. And then, for example, communion that is celebrated in most Christian spaces and faith practices. So it talks about the legitimacy, the theological legitimacy of the online, of the virtual and the digital concepts, and whether or not, what we practice, especially as we're thinking about the things that we call sacred, right? Are these practices real? Are these practices legitimate? Theologically, are they legitimate? So what I think about is my experience in the United Methodist Church. Right as we were going into quarantine, but then also wanting to stick with the practices, the liturgy, but then also the word and table, right? We could experience the word and can hear and respond to the word in this kind of digital way, in this technological way. But what happens in the moment of communion? What's happening during the Eucharist? What's happening during communion, in the moment of communion? There have been long debates historically, right, in church history about the nature of the bread and the wine in the Christian tradition, the nature of Christ, the presence of Christ, right? But not only that, but who can partake in the Eucharist, right? There's always been great debates, great conversations, and dialogue to be had around what's legitimate or not. So it only makes sense that in the age of Corona and us having to go almost 100% digital for a certain amount of time, that we would have to consider the theological implications of communion and of the Eucharist. I would answer this question by thinking about the efficacious nature of what God seeks to do in our world and the efficacious nature of what Christ did at that table right before he sat at a table with his disciples, before he gave himself up for the world, right? He had taken bread that was present. He broke it, gave thanks for it. He had taken the cup that was present, said, "This is my body, which is broken for you." And as often as you eat of this, as often as you partake in this meal, I think Jesus is saying, no matter where that table is, no matter where you're doing it, as long as you're gathered together, there I am in the midst. Also, it goes to that other scripture in Acts 1, right? Where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am. Also, the real presence of Christ is there. Even though it's happening through digital means, the real presence of Christ can still show up, right? And so I think that would be my response scripturally to what is happening in the moment of communion. Right? The real presence of Christ is there. But then what Jesus said when he sat at a table with his disciples, as often as you do this, no matter where it is, right? That this work of renewal, of being sustained, this work of salvation can still be a response to hearing the good news. But then it also can be this way of experiencing Jesus' presence. So yes, through digital means, through technological means, the Eucharist is still efficacious. What God and what Jesus said is happening, it's actually happening.